I feel like I'm on top of the world.
Hey, Jack, I feel like I'm flying.
You want to take it from the story just so we all know where we are? All right.
You've seen Titanic, maybe more times than you'd like to admit. You know every line, every tear, every dramatic pause. You watched Jack sketch Rose. You felt the ship break apart, and you cried at the ending even when you promised yourself you wouldn't. But here's the thing about Titanic that nobody talks about. The movie is hiding things from you, right there in plain sight, buried inside the most iconic scenes ever put on film, are mistakes so obvious that once you see them, you genuinely can't understand how they survived the editing room. These aren't tiny technical glitches that only film professors notice. Some of them are sitting directly in front of your face, waiting for the moment your eyes finally land on them. James Cameron spent over $200 million making this film. He rebuilt the ship. He obsessed over every detail, from the silverware patterns to the exact shade of the carpet. He delayed the release. He pushed every boundary Hollywood had ever set. And yet, despite all of that, despite the years of planning and the army of crew members dedicated to perfection, this movie is full of bloopers that somehow made it all the way into theaters and onto every screen in the world. That contradiction is what makes this so fascinating. How does the most expensive film ever made at the time contain mistakes this glaring? The answer says a lot about the chaos behind any massive production, and it makes rewatching Titanic an entirely different experience once you know what to look for. Let's start with something from one of the most tense sequences in the entire film. Rose is racing to the flooding lower decks, water rising around her ankles, panic written all over her face. She reaches a fire emergency station mounted on the wall, the kind with small axe locked behind a pane of glass. She grabs something nearby, shatters a glass, and pulls out the axe. It's fast, it's desperate. It's exactly the kind of detail that makes you feel the danger of the moment. But if you go back and watch that scene frame by frame, you'll notice something that defies all logic. The glass she just smashed comes back. Not gradually, not in a way that could be explained. In one shot it's broken, shards scattered, the emergency box wide open. Then the camera cuts, and when it returns, a significant portion of that same glass panel is sitting there completely intact, as if no one ever touched it. There's no explanation offered, no sound replacement, no visual trick to cover it up. The glass simply reappears, fully formed, and then the scene continues like nothing unusual just happened. It's the kind of thing your brain glosses over at full speed, but the moment you catch it, it becomes impossible to let go. And that axe doesn't just create problems with the glass. It creates a whole other problem of its own, one that's somehow even more visible than the first. A few moments later in that same sequence, Rose reaches Jack. He's handcuffed to a pipe, water climbing higher with every passing second. She lifts the axe above her head and swings it down toward the chain. The tension in the scene is real, or at least it's supposed to be. But as the axe makes contact, something goes wrong that the filmmakers absolutely did not want you to see. The head of the axe bends. It doesn't chip. It doesn't bounce. It doesn't behave like a real metal tool hitting a real metal chain. It flexes. It flops. It moves the way rubber moves, because that's exactly what it was made of. The production used a rubber prop axe for that swing, which is completely standard and completely understandable from a safety standpoint. Nobody wanted a real metal axe swinging inches from a person's wrist on a film set. But the problem is that the camera caught the flex clearly enough that for one brief, strange moment, the most life-or-death tool in the scene looks like something you'd find in a toy store. The illusion collapses in real time, right there in one of the film's most emotional moments. Now here's where things get even more interesting in that same handcuff scene, because there's a third mistake buried inside it that operates on a completely different level. Pay attention to what Jack is wearing when Rose is approaching him with the axe. His suspenders are clearly visible, draped over his shoulders, part of his overall look. The camera is on Rose, showing her positioning, showing her determination. Then it cuts to the moment of impact, the actual strike, and Jack's suspenders are gone, vanished. His shoulders are bare. Then the next shot comes along and the suspenders are back, sitting right where they always were, like they never left. This one has a simple explanation that somehow makes it even funnier than the mistake itself. That strike was filmed using a stunt performer, not Leonardo DiCaprio. A double stepped in for the moment the axe actually made contact, and somewhere in the transition between the real actor and the stand-in, someone forgot to match the wardrobe. So for one cut, Jack is wearing a slightly different outfit in the middle of a flooding ship while fighting for his life, and nobody caught it until the film was already in front of millions of people. Moving away from that sequence, there's a blooper hiding in a much quieter scene that requires you to be watching the background rather than the foreground. When Jack first walks into the upper-class section of the ship, entering Rose's world for the first time, the camera shifts to represent his perspective. We're supposed to be seeing through his eyes, taking the grandeur and elegance of a world he's never been part of. It's a beautiful, carefully constructed shot, but there's a problem with the glass doors he passes through. If you slow the footage down and focus on a reflection in the glass rather than the scene beyond it, you'll see someone who shouldn't be there. A cameraman, fully visible in silhouette, complete with equipment, reflected clearly in the polished surface of the door. It happens fast, and most viewers never look at the reflection because the scene is directing your attention elsewhere. But it's there undeniably. A crew member caught in the glass during one of the film's most carefully staged moments. In a production of this scale, on a film this scrutinized, the fact that this reflection survived every round of editing is genuinely shocking. There's also a wardrobe continuity issue that lives in a completely different kind of scene, one that has nothing to do with action or danger. Rose's beauty mark, the small dark spot near her face that became part of her signature look throughout the film, has a tendency to change sides. In certain shots, it sits clearly on one cheek. In others, it has migrated to the opposite side. This happened because filmmakers sometimes flip footage horizontally during editing, a common technique used to improve visual flow between cuts or to fix directional mismatches. When you flip an image, everything reverses, including the position of a beauty mark on someone's face. The result is a tiny cosmetic detail that wanders across Rose's face over the course of the movie, moving back and forth between scenes without any acknowledgement. It's the kind of thing that, once you know to look for it, turns every close-up of her face into a small puzzle. Then there are the moments where the scale of the film's production actually worked against its own continuity. During the chaotic sinking sequences, as the ship tears itself apart and passengers scramble in every direction, there are stunt performers being pulled and thrown across the frame. It's overwhelming to watch, which is probably why so few people notice what's visible in some of those frames. Look carefully at one of the performers being dragged downward by the ship's force, and you'll spot the wires. Not subtle shadows or vague distortions, actual wire rigging, visibly attached to the performer, visible against the backdrop of the scene. The wires were there for obvious safety reasons, and in most shots they were successfully hidden. But in a handful of frames that made it into the final cut, the illusion of passengers being helplessly thrown by a sinking ocean liner disappears, replaced by the reality of a controlled stunt being executed on a film set. The technology to remove those wires cleanly existed, and Cameron used it in plenty of other places throughout the film, which makes the ones that slip through all the more surprising. The film also contains mistakes that go beyond the physical and into the realm of historical accuracy, and some of those are just as jarring once you're aware of them. There's a dinner table scene where Rose demonstrates her sharp mind and rebellious personality by making a reference to Sigmund Freud. The joke lands perfectly within the scene. It catches everyone at the table off guard, embarrasses the right people, and establishes Rose as someone operating on a different intellectual level than those around her. But the reference doesn't actually work in 1912. The specific ideas Rose invokes from Freud, connecting masculinity to an obsession with size and power, weren't published or widely known at the time the Titanic sailed. Those theories emerged and circulated after the ship had already sunk. So Rose is essentially quoting a concept that wouldn't have been available to her in 1912, no matter how well-read she was. The writers clearly crafted the line to work for a modern audience, and it does work brilliantly on that level. But it quietly breaks the historical logic of the scene. Rose's appearance carries a similar problem that most viewers never think to question. Throughout the film, she wears bold red lipstick that contributes enormously to her visual identity. It signals confidence, defiance, and a refusal to conform to expectations. As a character choice, it makes complete sense. As a historical choice, it doesn't hold up at all. In 1912, red lipstick was not a fashionable or acceptable choice for upper-class women. It was associated with performers and women outside polite society. A woman of Rose's social standing wearing that shade in those settings would have caused a genuine scandal among the people around her, and yet no one in the film reacts to it at all. The filmmakers made a conscious decision to give Rose a modern aesthetic because it communicates her character to a contemporary audience instantly. But if you're watching through the lens of period accuracy, that lipstick is sending a completely different message than anyone in 1912 would have recognized. Some of the film's historical errors go even deeper than appearance. There's a scene early in the story where Jack is trying to talk Rose back from the edge of the ship, and he uses a personal story to connect with her. He mentions ice fishing on Lake Wissota, describing the cold and the experience in a way that grounds him and makes him feel real. It's a genuinely effective piece of writing. The problem is that Lake Wissota didn't exist in 1912. It's not a natural lake. It's a reservoir created when a dam was built in Wisconsin in 1917, 5 years after the Titanic went down. Before that dam was constructed, the lake simply wasn't there. The land was there, the river was there, but no Lake Wissota. So Jack is casually referencing a place that wouldn't exist for years after this conversation, which means either the writers didn't research it, or Jack is a time traveler who wandered into a very unfortunate situation. There's also a moment involving artwork that falls into the same historical trap. Rose brings paintings aboard the Titanic, and among them is a Picasso. She speaks about it with affection and knowledge, positioning herself as someone ahead of her time artistically. It's a great character beat, but the Picasso in question wasn't publicly available in 1912. The specific work shown in the film wasn't exhibited until 1916, for years after the Titanic sank. Picasso himself was still in the middle of developing the style that would define that painting during those years. Rose couldn't have owned it, displayed it, or talked about it with that level of familiarity in 1912, because it simply didn't exist in a form that could have reached her. The scene works emotionally and thematically, but it sacrifices historical reality to get there. And then there's the Statue of Liberty. Toward the end of the film, as the survivors reach New York, Rose sees Lady Liberty rising above the harbor, green and iconic against the sky. It's a powerful image, loaded with symbolism about new beginnings and freedom. But in 1912, that statue wasn't fully green. The Statue of Liberty was built from copper, which was a bright, shiny reddish-brown color when it was first installed. The green patina that we all associate with it today developed gradually through oxidation, a process that took decades. By 1912, the statue was somewhere in the middle of that transformation, partially green, partially brownish, streaky, and uneven in appearance. It was not the fully saturated iconic green that the film shows. Cameron made a deliberate choice to use the version of the statue that audiences would instantly recognize, which is understandable, but is another moment where the film trades accuracy for impact. And then there's a sketching scene, perhaps the most intimate and celebrated sequence in the entire film. Jack draws Rose. The moment is slow, personal, and beautifully filmed. Watch closely as Jack puts pencil to paper and makes his very first stroke. It's thick, it's bold, it's clearly visible on the page, a strong dark mark that starts the drawing. Now watch the finished sketch when the camera eventually shows it. That original bold stroke is gone. The opening mark, which should be the foundation of everything that followed, simply isn't there. In its place are light, refined lines that look like they were drawn by someone who had all the time in the world. The reason is straightforward. The final sketch was created separately by a professional artist before filming, not drawn in real time by Leonardo DiCaprio during the scene. The performance of drawing and the actual finished artwork were always going to be two different things. But the visual disconnect between the first mark we watch Jack make and the drawing we see it in the scene is a quiet little reminder that in filmmaking, almost nothing is exactly what it appears to be. Everything is constructed, layered, and assembled from pieces that weren't always meant to perfectly match. That's ultimately what makes Titanic such a fascinating film to revisit with fresh eyes. Cameron built something genuinely monumental, a film that redefined what movies could be and made the whole world feel the weight of a tragedy that happened nearly a century before it hit screens. The attention to detail in certain areas of production was extraordinary and unprecedented. But underneath all of that precision and ambition were the same pressures, limitations, and human errors that affect every film ever made. Shots had to be reused from different takes. Stunt doubles couldn't always match their actors perfectly. Props bent when they weren't supposed to. History got quietly rewritten to serve the story. And somewhere in a rush to put all together, glass reappeared whole, wires stayed visible, and a beauty mark crossed from one cheek to the other between cuts. None of it changes what the film is. It's still one of the greatest movies ever made. But watching it now, knowing what's hiding in those scenes, transforms the experience into something different. You're not just watching a love story anymore. You're watching the entire impossible machinery of filmmaking strain under its own weight. And every once in a while, you catch a glimpse of something that was never meant for your eyes.